Welcome to the Brewmaster Series, where brewers from around the world share the incredible stories behind their journey, the challenges they've conquered, and the brews that define them today. Raw insights, bold creations, straight from the source. Cheers.
So we're starting with the first thing, the name, and of course you're still working with Brooklyn Brewing, but just say that and then we go on.
So, as you know, I'm Garrett Oliver, Brewmaster of Brooklyn Brewery, Editor-in-Chief of the Oxford Companion to Beer, and author of the Brewmaster's Table, among many other things.
Now, I remember when we first met in London, we were sitting together with Michael Jackson.
Yes.
And we had a lot of fun on talking about beer and food. But at that time, you were already brewmaster, already one of the most professional beer pairing experts. But how did you get into all that?
Well, I was actually trying to put beer with food as a way of promoting beer, because you have to remember, of course, when I started professionally, it was 1989. And in the United States, we had basically no craft beer movement yet. There was a little bit of what they called the microbrewing at the time. People were starting to understand that beer was not just thin, fizzy, and yellow with no flavor. But it was very early.
But at that time, you were already a home brewer?
I was already a home brewer. And then, for years, and then I went in 1989 and I apprenticed to Brewmaster Mark Whitty, who had previously been at Samuel Smith's. He went to Harriet Watt. So he taught me the professional side of brewing, kind of the old-fashioned way. I didn't go to brewing school, but ironically, my books are now used in brewing schools. And I also have a foundation. I send people to brewing school. So, I have that engagement. But back then, it was the rise of things like Food Network on television. And so people were starting to valorize, to look up to chefs and to look up to food. And you saw people putting the wine and the food together. And when they did it, they said 2 + 2 = 5. And, you have this beautiful lifestyle and everything else. And I started to see that beer had a much wider range of flavor than wine does. And when put together at the table, we could achieve things that wine couldn't do. And that people didn't know this. And I thought that if you gave the consumer some utility, the question is, okay, I have craft beer, and someone says, so what? Like, well, I can make your dinner better every day. Really? Yes, and in making your dinner better every day, I'm going to make your life 5% better. Just 5%, 2%. But how often does your life become 2% better, right? So if your dinner is a little bit better every day, your life just gets a little bit better. And like if you read my book, Brewmaster Series, that's what people say they got from it, which is why the book has been out there now for 22 years. And it's still one of the top-selling beer books after Michael's of all time. So I'm proud of that. And people can still use that for great utility. But I like to say, I do competitions, usually for charity. Wine versus beer with cheese, wine versus beer with fine dining. There are two kinds of sommeliers, the ones that know they're going to lose and the ones that don't know they're going to lose, but they all lose.
But one thing that I really loved about when we've been friends for many, many years.
Yes.
But one thing is you were always very inspiring, telling people that beer is something special. I remember when my son was just turning 21. He said,
let's say that.
That's what you said.
Yeah.
And you had a cat. It was called Monster.
Yeah, Monster, yes. And the beer was also called Monster.
The beer was called Monster.
Yes.
What beer do you brew at the moment? What's your favorite beer that you brew at the moment?
So many things happening right now. So, we have some, cheers, skål.
It's true.
Some very traditional beers, like our mainstay, Brooklyn Lager, things like this, and Pilsners, etc. But then also we're brewing pale ale with fonio, which is an ancient West African grain that gives you all these kind of like lychee fruit, tropical sorts of flavors. It's a grain that requires like no inputs, so there's no no chemicals used, no fertilizer, no pesticide, no fungicide.
Have to malt it?
No, you don't even have to malt it. It's an adjunct. We use it at 15%. It's not Einheitsgebot, but you can add it in a beer. You make a nice pilsner and a little bit of lilt of lychee fruit on top. Very nice, and extremely ecologically friendly. Like zero input, grain. Something we need to know for the future. And completely resistant to climate change. Now it grows in an area where it might only rain 3 or 4 times a year. Doesn't need any irrigation. Nothing. Yeah.
And I'm saying that this your new beer. How is it called?
Yeah, Fonio Rising is the one that I'm talking about right now. There are so many new beers from us, every year. We still do a lot of crazy things. We have a number of beers where the beer is made kind of like a Belgian strong golden, but then we suffuse it with what we call pomace. So when you press the wine, you have left over the skins, the stems, and the seeds. We put it in contact with the beer, which is like a Duvel-like beer, for maybe a week. And all the wine color and the flavors come out into the beer.
There's some residual sugars?
Yeah, there's very little left because generally the yeast has already eaten almost everything, but a little bit of alcohol maybe, but mostly color, flavor, and aroma. And so you get a beer which is somewhere between a beer and a wine, and it is actually all beer, but people, when they taste it, they can't decide, like, what is it? Is it beer? Is it wine? But they just know they like it. And so we blur the lines.
Is there any beer that you thought, well, I'd love to have brewed that, but it's not in my range, but it's something lovely.
Oh, I mean, every time I go to Cantillon, I feel exactly this. And as you probably know, Vinny Salerzo and I, some years back, we made a beer where we took the wort from his cool ship. So he had spontaneously started wort. He shipped it, across the country to me, an entire batch, so more than like 30 hectoliters of a beer shipped across to me. It wasn't even beer yet. It was just starting the fermentation, but all wild, Sonoma County, California, microflora. And then we added 10 times as much wort. We put it straight into barrels and barrel fermented it for a year and a half, and then re-fermented in the bottle.
Is there anything that you wish you had never done? I mean, every brewer does something that was
Not
going in a very wrong direction. What was that? Did you have any of these experiences?
I'm trying to remember exactly what one was. I think it was focused on like one hop, and I think it was the East Kent Golding, and we had gone so heavy with it that it just didn't turn out to be a good idea. I mean, it was well blended. I love the East Kent Golding, but I think that we had just we'd taken it a step too far. And I got the beer and I was like, okay, that's not where we want to go. I mean, it's sold fine, but I kind of you slink out of the room. Not everything can be a success. But if you want to be creative, you have to take chances.
And a last question, if someone was a home brewer, like you started out as a home brewer.
Yes.
What should a home brewer do, or what should they possibly avoid?
Well, two things. Obviously, the thing that you want to avoid is infections, poor fermentation, and I would say most people twice as much yeast. The pitching rate, on your average smack pack or whatever, you have a dry, whatever else, it's okay. But if you don't see the fermentation start, at least for top fermented beers, for ales, if you don't see fermentation going the next morning, really kind of starting to go, and if you don't see anything in lagers, you're not there. You want to see fermentation start to happen relatively quickly. 12 hours. If you're waiting 24 hours to see any action, you're not going to have a great fermentation. So, having your fermentation launch well and be clean and the yeast is happy is very important. One of the superiorities, I think, of German beer is a lot of them never repitch yeast. But we have to learn this. Cheers. Cheers. Sehr gut.